I'll just wait one more minute and we'll get started. All right, why don't we get started? It looks like we have a pretty decent turnout today. Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is Joe Garfunkel, the Houston chapter lead, and this is our monthly CCL-Houston metro area meeting. We'll go on to the next slide, Dory. For our agenda today, we're going to have a special thank you for Sarah and Jimmy that rejoined us. We'll do a presentation for that. And then we have our special guest today as well, Matt Lanza from Space City Weather, to talk about, I guess, weather in general and the impact of climate change on Houston. Then we'll go through our monthly calling campaign, our status reports from the 5 letters, and hopefully we'll have time for some breakout sessions. Next story. Okay, Dory, you want to do this one?
Yes, thank you, Sarah and Jimmy, for joining us on this call. For those who don't know, Sarah and Jimmy were part of our steering committee. They were lever leaders. They have recently had transitions in their life where Sarah moved to DC and Jimmy's moving down to Alpine. Is that right? I think, yeah, make sure. And we want to thank you for what you've contributed over the years to Citizens Climate Lobby's Houston chapter. You care, you act, you make a difference. And to show our gratitude for your dedication to climate through your volunteer work with the CCL's Houston chapter, we've donated $50 in your names to Trees for Houston, because their mission is to plant, protect, and promote. And short of a fee on carbon and a dividend back to the people, one of the best ways we can make the climate more sustainable and equitable is through planting trees throughout the city. So thank you, Sarah and Jimmy.
This is so nice, guys. Thank you so much. This is so cool. It was so great volunteering with you all. It was a great experience, and I learned a lot from you about advocacy and lobbying and outreach that will be really useful in my new career in DC. So thank you so much for everything.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'll just second that. It was really a privilege. I think the community at CCL is very special. I think anybody still in the chapter is definitely doing good work. And aside from just the general chapter membership, special thanks to the leadership. I think all of us handled our kind of rough transition really well. And again, I think that just goes to the credit of our belief in the mission that we're doing. And thank you guys. This is very nice.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Jimmy. Really appreciate all your work you've done. And thanks for coming back for this. It was great to see you guys again.
I'm actually going to stick around because I'm really interested in what Matt has to say.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right.
Very good. I actually, unfortunately, I do have to sign off. I have another meeting today that I have to get ready for, but I will just say as a preface to Space City Weather, this is the panel that I go to for all my Houston related weather, and it's what I use at work when we're preparing for weather events. So thanks to the good work at Space City Weather. You guys are awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, turning it over to you. It's all yours now.
Okay, so we can stop sharing here and just have a conversation. So yeah, Matt from Space City Weather, thank you so much for being with us today. And I thought we'd start off with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Space City Weather?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me again. And sorry about last month, failing at the last minute. Crazy life sometimes. I'm Matt Lanza. So I am a meteorologist. I went to Rutgers University in New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey. I always like to tell people I grew up on the wrong side of the rain-snow line. It always rained instead of snowed at my house. But I had a love for weather since I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do, which if you talk to other meteorologists, you'll hear that story a lot. And so went to Rutgers, graduated, decided I wanted to go into TV, like a lot of meteorologists. And I worked for about 5 years in upstate New York, small market, Utica, 100 inches of snow a year, great people, great place. But just was not what I wanted to do. So I got out of broadcast meteorology and actually transitioned into the energy sector and found my way to Houston like so many other people have. to work in energy as a forecast meteorologist and help companies, understand how weather impacts their business, which is just a fascinating thing. And over time, it has sort of transitioned from not just that to also now preparing companies for impacts of significant weather. I think Harvey was kind of a game changer. It actually started for me with Hurricane Sandy, where the company I worked for, I had to advise them for New York City impacts. And I had family, obviously being from New Jersey. So Sandy was kind of like the first foray into that, prepping people for extreme impacts from weather. And now that's kind of like my thing, is sort of what I did. It feels like that's the job now, is just waiting for the next weather disaster and kind of preparing people to kind of walk through it. But it's a very interesting job. Obviously, I wouldn't say it's fun necessarily, because there's a whole aspect of human suffering that comes along with bad weather. But whatever the case, it's, I feel that it's good to help people in that regard and try and keep people safe. And Space City Weather came about kind of, I want to say by accident. Having worked in television, obviously I like to communicate with people and tell people about weather impacts. And when I was working in upstate New York, we started a weather blog, and it actually became fairly popular, particularly amongst like the hardcore, what we call weather weenies, the people that are just really interested in weather. And we have snow weenies up there that are just, they want to know what the snow is going to do, because they have snowmobiling and skiing that they're all concerned with. So I had some experience with that. And then through a mutual friend, Eric Berger, who runs Space City Weather, was at the Houston Chronicle at the time and had his Sci Guy weather blog, which is very popular. He wanted a little bit of help. And so a mutual friend got us in touch. We kind of met, talked it over, and decided that I would help him out kind of on Fridays. He left the Chronicle for Ars Technica to go write about space. And he decided to ask me, like, hey, we've got this following. We talk a lot about weather. Why not kind of parlay it into a weather blog? Let's put something together. Are you interested in that? I'm like, sure, let's do it. And then, at that point, this is pre-Harvey, and we had kind of like what I would kind of deem like a cult following. You have like the hardcore people that follow you, and are just like the hardcore weather weenies that really like it. And they kind of followed along. And then I think we had Tax Day in 2016, and then Harvey obviously in 2017, and that completely changed what this is and what our mission kind of is, I think. And it became something that was kind of just a little side project that we did for fun to continue communicating weather, and became almost like a community service for people that were going through nasty weather and things of that nature. So we have evolved into that, and now we've become fairly popular. I still think there's a lot of people that we haven't reached yet, and that I would love to be able to, and hopefully we'll continue to do that over time. But we'd like to be known as the place where people will come when the weather is bad, and that most of the time we're going to be out there and we're not going to be that exciting. We're going to be pretty boring, not have much to say. But when what hits the fan, that's when we want to be there for people and to help them. And we want people to take, when we have a reaction that's fairly serious, we want them to kind of take it seriously. So we sort of use the whole idea of no hype as being like, look, most of the time we're not going to give you much that's that interesting, but when it really counts, you're going to see us start to up our messaging and upgrade how we view things. I think we're kind of going through that process right now with what's coming next week, is that we don't want to go too far yet, because this particular tropical system and rain event that we're expecting in Houston is going to be complicated, to say the least. There's a lot of moving parts that will impact how much rain we do or don't see, and where exactly it happens. So we're stepping up the messaging, because we know that there's the chance that this could be a significant rain event with some significant flash flooding, but we don't know exactly where, how much, and exactly when that's going to be. So we're sort of stepping things up slowly but surely here, and that's kind of what our brand is to do that. Is we're not going to go 0 to 100. We're going to incrementally pick it up and have more people pay attention when they have to. And I think that's kind of, it's been a valuable lesson for us in terms of reaching people, and that we reach a diverse audience of people that want weather information in a, what we would call, almost say, a rational manner. And that's kind of become, I think, one of the big things that I start to preach to other people, that look, we have a way of doing this and it seems to work. So, how can we improve it and do it better? So I guess I would be remiss if not saying we started an app this year. That was a request from a lot of people that I had wanted no part of whatsoever. But we have the app now, so you can get our stuff on that. And we also started a Spanish language site under the sort of notion of being more equitable and reaching more people where they are. We brought on Maria Sotolongo, who is native Spanish speaking and is bilingual, and actually came to us out of the blue and said, you guys really should consider this. And it's something that Eric and I had been talking about for a while. I had a conversation with somebody at a conference last year pre-COVID, and it just sort of was like one of those illuminating moments. And this particular individual has done a lot within the National Weather Service in the weather community to try and improve how weather risks are translated into Spanish, because it's not just English to Spanish. There's all kinds of different dialects and people. So kind of inspired by that. And, you know, it was sort of like we wanted to come up with a way to do this. We just didn't know how. And then Maria kind of came out of the blue and suggested it, and we sort of put 2 and 2 together and managed to get that going. So now we're in English, we're in Spanish, and we have an app. So it's been a great and exciting year for us, and hopefully we're able to reach more people.
That's wonderful. And I think I have the app. I think the app is a great idea. So I'm glad that y'all took that plunge. Do you still have family in Jersey, or were they okay with Ida?
Yeah, thankfully everybody was good. They're in southern Jersey, which is okay. I had a little bit of a scare with one of the tornadoes that my college roommate actually lives one town over from the tornado that, you know, the one that everybody saw the pictures of that ripped, you know, some of the roofs off houses in southern Jersey, which was just, you know, I didn't actually think about it until just after the tornado. It was like, oh no, Jim. And I had to like send him a text message and check on him, but thankfully he was okay. But I don't know of anybody that really had any issues, thankfully. But we do have my wife's family is up in northern Jersey, my family's in southern Jersey, and as far as we know, everybody was okay.
Good. As we're going, participants, if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and we will try to get to it at the end. As kind of a first question, at Space City Weather, do you have any constraints that shape your ability to talk about climate change, be it corporate or you know, a need to avoid political controversy or anything like that? Yeah,
we don't. That's for sure. And in fact, we've struggled a bit with the comments sometimes. You know, there's been instances where, you know, I think one thing I remember is back earlier this summer when they had the extreme, ridiculous heat wave in the Northwest. It was just sort of like a passing comment I was talking about the weather pattern in general, how it was going to impact Texas, but, you know, sort of off the cuff, I was mentioning like, you know, hey, you know, here's the Northwest with crazy, ridiculous heat you're going to hear about. And, you know, that's kind of has the fingerprints of climate change on it type sort of event. And that actually inspired some comments from people in the comments that were not, you know, positive, because I feel like the people that view talking about that more positively are less apt to comment than the people that view talking about that negatively. So the only real constraint we have is whether or not we want to deal with that, I think. You know, to be honest with you, we want to be viewed as a weather blog because we want to provide weather information. We don't want to alienate people because of views, but at the same time, we have to be honest about, you know, what the science says and what things are. And if there's a reason to bring in climate change into things, you know, we're going to do it. I think after Harvey, we didn't write at length, but we did point to a couple of the studies that had come out that showed that climate change increased. You know, Harvey would have happened without climate change, but it increased and made it worse in certain parts of the area. So, you know, we pointed to some of those studies. I don't recall if we had any blowback from that, but it becomes sort of a matter of, you know, even, you know, the comments are the comments, but you know, are people really going to tune you out if you bring it up? You know, because obviously we're a source of weather information. Are people going to say like, hey, you're biased, so we can't really trust you? I don't think I think we've earned people's trust enough to not have to deal with that, and that if we have to deal with a little blowback, whatever is what it is. But yeah, I think that there's no restriction on us, and, you know, it's kind of our policy that, like, you know, look, we're not going to sugarcoat it. Climate change is real, it's happening. And it's probably going to get worse. So, you know, we kind of have to continue towing that line a bit. And I think one of the things I want to do kind of going forward is I've tried to, it's not study necessarily, but follow some people that are good climate communicators, but do it in a way that is, I don't want to say kinder and gentler than some. You know, I think that there's some ways to go about it that are better than others. And I feel that we've done a good job with that with weather information. So maybe at times we can sort of draw on the climate stuff a little bit better. And one of the things I actually want to focus on is this wrath of, constantly rapidly intensifying hurricanes that we've had in the Gulf for the last 5 years, and whether or not that's actually emblematic of climate change or if it's just kind of bad luck and coincidence, which I think it's a little bit of both. And I have some friends that actually research this and get into it. And I want to talk to them and maybe interview them for the blog so we can actually put some color on that, because I think that that's a question people have. They've seen it enough in the last few years that, it's just one of those things. So, but yeah, I mean, from our perspective, the only hindrance, I guess, is how much we want to deal with the blowback from. And sometimes we will close down comments, to be honest with you. We have done that before when it gets a little out of control, because we don't want people populating with misinformation and stuff like that. So sometimes we'll just say, look, just leave it well enough alone. If they want to reach us, they can, and that's that.
I'm glad we're talking, because that whole idea of approaching this conversation with kindness is something that we share. That's a big part of what we do. You've worked in TV, and so when you think about news stations and how they mention or don't mention climate, do you think that they operate kind of the same way as Space City Weather, not afraid to bring it up when it's relevant, or do you think it's different when you're on TV?
I think 10 years ago, the answer to that question would have been it's different, but I think now I think the industry has matured. And it's because of certain meteorologists that have not been afraid to go at it and to actually go full bore into the issue of climate change. And I think good examples of this are someone like John Morales in Miami, who does a very good job of keeping that in the forefront. And I think that team of meteorologists at his station actually really shares that vision, and they do a very good job of they talk about climate change on a global scale, but they also localize it to show people in Miami, like, look, these are examples of your daily life being impacted by this. Because Miami has had some issues with flooding and things like that because of sea level rise. And obviously with hurricane seasons and stuff like that, they're pretty sensitive to that. So they've done a very good job. There's I know meteorologists, and I can't think of their names. There's a lot of them, but in Phoenix and Detroit, in North Carolina. So it's actually in places that maybe you wouldn't necessarily expect, in some of these states that are maybe a little bit less progressive, or more purple, I guess, than just blue. So it's not just a something that you've got meteorologists and what you would deem liberal markets doing this. This is spread out, and more meteorologists have been less afraid and feel more empowered to talk about this. And I think especially as you see more pictures of impacts from wildfires, from hurricanes, from sea level rise and things like that, it becomes a lot easier to be like, look, this is what it is, right? And we're not going to sugarcoat it, we're not going to lie to you. And I think that's kind of one of the things too, is that you're starting to see people that want more honesty they just want to be told. They don't want to have things sugarcoated. They don't want to necessarily have their hand held. They just want to be told what it means. That's sort of one of the approaches we do with weather. We're just going to tell you what it means. We're not going to sugarcoat it for you. We're just going to tell you what it is, and that's that. And I think that's sort of a refreshing perspective sometimes. And I think that the whole industry has gotten a little bit better with that. There's these organizations like Climate Central that produce a lot of data and graphics for TV stations now that they can share very easily, that show trends in temperature, trends in sea level rise, trends in precipitation. They can share with their audience. So the whole industry has gotten a little bit better with that. And I think it's just kind of a constantly incrementally improving situation.
Are there any Houston area meteorologists that you think do a particularly good job on TV of addressing climate?
So number one, to be honest with you, I don't watch that much local news. I used to watch local news a lot. Now I don't, because mostly I just don't have time. But in general, I haven't seen anything one way or the other. I feel that most of the Houston TV meteorologists do a good job in general. But I don't know that anybody's done anything kind of above and beyond like some of these others, have done at this point. But maybe changing. There may have been things that I missed, so I could be out, on this one a little bit too. But yeah.
Got it. So getting to kind of the meat of our conversation here, what changes have you seen in Houston's climate over the last several decades?
Yeah, I think it's there's definitely been change, and there's actually some, I think, statistics to actually bear this out beyond just warming temperatures and things like that. I mean, obviously you have that. A lot of times what will happen is you'll talk about how the climate, the temperatures have warmed. Our temperatures here in Houston are taken officially up at IAH Bush Airport, and that area has grown. So you get the people that come at you with the urban heat island argument a lot. And it's kind of like, yeah, I understand that. Yes, that's part of it for sure, but that can't explain all of it. And so, we've seen this warming trend in temperatures. If you look at the new set of what we call the 30-year normals that came out back in May or June, every 10 years we update these climatological normals, and the temperatures, clearly have gone up, compared from the 1981 to 2010 iteration to the 1991 to 2020 iteration. That's one signal that I think is pretty obvious with the warming temperatures. I look at a place like Galveston that has that's probably the best weather record continuity that we have in our area. Goes back to the 1880s, I think. And if you look at what has happened there, they have just been ballistically setting nighttime minimum temperature records for warmth. And that is, I think, significantly because of how warm the Gulf's been. I mean, the last, 5, 6, 7 years, every time I look at a map of the Gulf of Mexico water temperatures in summertime, it's red, an anomaly map. So they're always above normal. So it's almost like routine now for the Gulf to be above normal. You look at the Gulf this year, other than where Ida went through, where it cooled the water a little bit. The Western Gulf is very warm. We've been very fortunate this year to not have a storm come through, but it's just another summertime data point. And I think a sea of them that has kind of been emblematic of climate change. I think if you look at precipitation, the signals with precipitation are a little bit messier because of how localized precipitation can be. I think a good example of this is actually what just happened up in New York City, where there was a lot of talk made about how Central Park had their highest hourly rate of precipitation on record. Their records go back into the 1800s, and yes, it was impressive and not good. But if you look at some of the surrounding stations, they've all had hourly precipitation records that were at or above where Central Park was. So it becomes more of a dumb luck thing. Sometimes you have to weed through that noise a little bit. Precipitation is always messier. But in general, there has been a trend toward, I think, wetter signal. If you look at the eastern part of the US this year, it has been very, very wet. A couple of years ago, we had a similar situation. That is emblematic of climate change. And then if you look real close into Southeast Texas, it also has shown an uptick. I attended a talk, I think it was between tax day and Harvey. So it was after tax day. And the state climatologist of Texas, John Nielsen Gavin, talked about how he's done analysis of every county in Texas and precipitation events, and how often you get like 4 inches of rain or 8 inches of rain in an event. And the signal across Texas is kind of messy, as you might expect. Some counties are up, some counties are down, but in Harris County, it has been up considerably. So there's been this trend toward a lot more of these 3, 4, 5 inch type rainfall events in the last 30, 40 years than we had prior to that time. And what causes that, whether it's luck or something else, nobody knows, because if you try and replicate that in the counties around Houston, you don't get that signal. So it's actually kind of interesting. And I think that some of it may have to do with the fact that impacts of climate change in Texas in general are expected to be kind of mixed, where you have stronger droughts. You saw what happened back in 2011 with the extreme drought that we had then. You may have stronger drought periods, but you also are going to have, when it gets wet, it's going to get wetter. So you sort of have both competing with each other. And that kind of makes, I think, the signal a little tough sometimes to actually delineate in the real data, from some of the noise that you have going on here. But in general, it's gotten wetter. I think it's pretty obvious that flooding has gotten worse in Houston in recent years. I do think some of that is just by chance. Some of that, a good chunk of it, is because of development, for sure. How we developed this area and how things drain compared to even, gosh, 10, 15 years ago. It's different. Some of it is also because the ground has sunk a little bit, I think, from subsidence, but some of it is also climate. So it's a complicated picture here, with a lot of competing signals with one another, but they all tend to point to flooding getting worse, and then occasionally drought getting worse as well. But I think from our perspective, the flooding is a little bit more concerning, especially because it's been sort of in the forefront in recent years.
So looking forward, is it fair to say that you see hotter temperatures coming through Houston, overall wetter, but also extreme periods of dry? And then do you see like those massive cold snaps happening with more frequency in our future as well?
Yeah, that was the other thing that was kind of crazy about this year. So from the heat perspective, yes, it probably will continue to get hotter. I think that's almost a guarantee at this point. Whether or not it gets wetter, relative to recent history, I think is another matter. I don't know if we've been through like sort of the wave of this and now things are going to go down, or if this is the new normal. I don't think anybody really knows that for sure. Probably be for flooding events, a propensity for drought events to get a little bit stronger as well, and maybe a little longer lasting. So maybe instead of a year or two, maybe you get 3, 4, 5 years. You can look at what happened in the 1950s in Texas. We had a pretty significant drought, and that caused a lot of problems. And then 2011 was that was over several years. I think 2011 was as bad as that, if not worse, over a shorter duration of time. So I think these droughts get a little bit more extreme as time goes on. The cold snap picture is one that's really, really difficult to say with any confidence, I think. I think there was a lot of talk about, climate change possibly influencing, how cold it got. And I think to some extent that there's probably some logic to that it maybe makes jet stream behavior a little more extreme. So you can have things like this. But if you look back at Houston's history, I mean, this was a really nasty cold snap that we had this year. But you only have to go back to 1989 to find an example of one that was pretty bad as well. There were others going back in time, also back into the 1800s. Now, that doesn't mean that climate change didn't impact this one, but I think it does mean that the signal's a little bit tougher to discern, which certainly it'll take a lot of research to really kind of understand that. But the research that has been done, actually one of my former professors at Rutgers has sort of led this research, Jennifer Francis, talking about jet stream, I don't know if it was she that came up with this or someone else, called it basically jet weirding, where the jet stream kind of behaves in blockier type things that cause Hurricane Sandy and stuff like that. So you just get these more extreme rises and dips in the jet stream as the Arctic warms. And so there's been a lot of research that suggests that's a possibility, but there's also been, by very credible climate scientists, not people that are on the fringe, like actual people within the climate science community, that push back on that a little bit and say, well, we're not really sure that that's the case. So there's a lot of unknowns here, which, isn't great to necessarily not know kind of where you're going, but I think that's part of the reality, is that we are kind of heading into this uncharted territory type situation, and that there's risks that maybe we haven't necessarily accounted for at this point in time that we have to certainly watch for.
Do you follow the work of Catherine Hayhoe at Texas A&M?
Yes, she is definitely one of the people that, there's only so many hours in a day and I can only read so much, but she's one of the people that when she writes about something or I saw her give a presentation, gosh, I want to say about 6 months ago, just talking about climate change in Texas and communicating it. But she's one that I definitely stop in and listen to and watch for. And actually, I even had a Twitter exchange with her at one point recently over some comment that somebody made in something I posted, and she was kind of like, welcome to my world sort of deal. But she's done fantastic work because I think she gets the whole idea of empathy. I mean, climate change is a serious topic, but you have to approach it from a perspective that is going to not cause people to tune out right away. And you have to, if you really want people to understand this and take action and do the right things, you have to be empathetic with them. And honestly, there's a lot of parallels between that and what we do just day to day with weathers. And I've talked to people about this, is that, you know, when we were going through Harvey, it was almost like our blog wasn't just typing about the weather. We were trying to tell people, look, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel. We get it. We're going through it too. We know what it's like. And if you kind of give people that softer touch that shows you're a human and not just, you know, a scientist and or somebody behind a keyboard or whatever, I feel that really does win people over in a lot of ways. And I think Houston is a unique place for that because of how much flooding we've experienced and how many disasters we've had. You know, it's just been one after the other the last 5 or 6 years. And kind of, we understand people are going through a lot and that there's a lot of trauma that's built up. Approaching it from the softer, gentler touch, I think kind of helps. Like I said, I want to handhold people. We want to tell them what's going to happen. We're going to be honest with them. But you have to do it in a way, there's a way to do that and not be a jerk about it, right? And I think that Dr. Hayhoe's mastered that kind of approach to communicating climate change research and information.
Yeah, CCL works a lot with her. She's wonderful. So, you know, given that trauma that you were just mentioning for Houston, how urgent do you think it is that the United States reaches net zero greenhouse gas emissions?
It's a tough question. I don't know. You know, it's one of those things that you have to think about it from the big picture, right? You've got to follow the science. You have to go with what the science says is going to be the best way to approach this. But I think given just the reality of the picture around the country, you know, it's going to take an enormous amount of investment to get there. And you know, do political leaders have the appetite for that? I don't know. I really don't know. And, you know, it's definitely something we're going to eventually have to get to, but whether that's got to be done in the next, you know, 10 years, if it's even possible to do it in the next 10 years, I don't know. It's a tough call, but it's definitely something that I think is more on the table now than it was 10 or 15 years ago, especially because we're seeing impacts now, today, not in the future, right? So I think that kind of maybe pushes the urgency a little bit higher, but you know, you just gotta go with what the research says to do and kind of model our approaches off that in a way that tries to bring everybody on board. But you know, at some point you've got to recognize the situation that you're in and act on that.
So, you know, CCL is a big advocate of carbon pricing. And so I'm curious, what is your understanding of carbon pricing? And then what is your opinion of carbon pricing legislation?
Yeah, I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't been able to read too much of it. I've seen bits and pieces about it in the past and read a little bit before coming here to talk to y'all, just to kind of try and understand a little bit better. But maybe it would be better if you just sort of give me a you know, 50,000 foot overview to just kind of understand a little bit more the politics and everything behind that.
Sure. So a 15,000 foot or 50,000 foot overview here. So the carbon pricing that we advocate for would start at $15 a metric ton of CO2 emissions, and it would go up by $10 a year from there on. It would kick in about 10 months after the legislation is implemented. That rising fee is predicted to result in about a 40% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions in 12 years, and then 90% by 2050. Economically, this has widespread support from over 3,000 economists in the United States. It's the most economically viable way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we like to partner carbon pricing with a dividend, to where the money that is raised from carbon pricing gets redistributed to American households, so that Americans, especially working class Americans, are not penalized with higher energy costs or costs associated with carbon intensive products. That is a 50,000 foot overview. Do you have questions there?
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And yeah, I mean, we've got to strive for strategies that are like that are going to, you know, help the country get to where it needs to be, and to do what's right by people. Because I think that there's definitely been this push toward more equitable sort of outcomes. It's one of those things that I feel like a lot of times we've neglected. And after, I don't know if it was after tax day or Harvey, Jim Blackburn here in Houston started Bayou City Initiative, which is talking about flood mitigation and flood control and flooding really education, and how it needs to be more equitable and reach some of communities that maybe don't necessarily understand that. So I think equity is definitely the big buzzword kind of going forward, and strategies like that to help improve air quality and reduce emissions and things of that nature are very important. And I think that that's a very good idea to push forward.
Space City Weather and you have significant followings in the Houston area, and growing. I know you'll be modest about you guys, but it is growing. So, you know, if you or Space City Weather wanted to endorse carbon pricing legislation, our specific bill, or just a statement of support for the general policy, I think that would carry a lot of weight. But we would also love to have you lobby with us at some point when we meet with congressional offices. What do you think of any of that?
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, obviously, I have to talk to Eric. I always am like, I'm just kind of the junior partner in all this, but no, it's definitely something I'll talk to Eric about, because I think that one of the things that we have, and it's one of the things that I've kind of personally tug of war with a little bit internally, is how much do we want to take this? And I've actually had some conversations with some people that are within the community, and how much advocacy do we want to put forward? Because again, it's sort of like we run the whole trying to balance, not getting people to tune out with keeping them tuned in and not alienating them, but things that are positive and generally have bipartisan support are very good. So how much advocacy type stuff we do going forward is something that we are, I think, struggling. I'm definitely struggling with trying to go like, how far into it do I want to go? Because the more I see, the more I'm like kind of biting my nails and saying, how much longer can we just sort of sit on the sidelines without just full bore going for things? And I think one of the big things that we're trying to be a little more outspoken with now is, flood mitigation and things like that, because that's urgent. It needed to be done yesterday. But as time goes on, we need to do more, I think. And I think that's something, it was certainly something I'll talk to Eric about, but hopefully it's something we can do more of going forward, especially as we build an audience that we know, like, look, they're going to stick with us. They're going to listen to us. We don't have to worry so much about alienating anyone, and especially with things that, objectively don't require alienation, right? So.
Yeah, I will follow up with you on that and provide you any additional information you want and all of that stuff. It has been really nice to see even the most conservative members of Congress who used to be climate deniers now saying, we recognize it's happening. We've seen Texas area conservatives join Republican climate caucuses to discuss the issue. And so that needle moving is great. And it would be great to have Space City Weather along there. So as kind of a last question here, do you see it as your role to educate your followers on climate issues? I know people turn in and they want to know if it's going to rain today. So how do you balance like weather versus long-term climate trends going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of goes back to what I was just saying, the struggle with trying to advocate and to push more versus holding back, to avoid, ticking anyone off. But I think that it is probably our job to be more into this. And I had a conversation not too long ago with actually one of the interesting things over the last 18 months has been watching COVID and watching the communication challenges that people in the medical field have had and parallels to what we deal with every day. And there has just been so many things where I've just been like, wow, yeah, I get that. We've been there. We've been dealing with this for years. And now you guys have to deal with it. And so, it's one of the reasons at an AMS conference last year, I organized a panel talk with someone in climate change, someone in seismology, someone in volcanology, and Judge Hidalgo here in Houston to talk about approaches to these various issues that we have, and how we can learn from each other, because I think that's critical going forward. But anyway, coming out of that, one of the people I got to know was an MD PhD student who's now working and doing her rotations. And she was sort of pressing me on this and being like, I used to not necessarily buy into climate change, and now obviously I see enough, and I do. But I think it would be, her point was that she thinks it would be good for us to kind of get into that, because we do have that trust that's built up among followers, that we could maybe make a difference in getting people that are kind of on the fence to the right side of the fence. And I think that going forward, it's something that it's certainly something that I don't hesitate to do more. Like putting the thing in the blog back in June about what was happening in the Northwest 3 or 4 years ago, I probably wouldn't have done. Today, I'm going to do it without apology. Like, that is what it is. And I think going forward, the more we can do that, the better. And I think that, obviously one of the struggles that I have is time management with 2 kids and full-time job, and this being a side thing, it gets a little bit difficult. And hopefully as time goes on, I can, free up a little more time, as I want to talk to people. I want to read more research. I want to write about it. I want to kind of communicate, like, here's what the latest research says. And I talked to this person, this is what they told me, and this is what we can expect. And this is how it impacts Houston. Because I think that would be informative, and people hope trust would do good for the community. So I feel that it's going from being something that would be good for us to do to almost an obligation, and that's the struggle internally is real with how far you want to go with that. And it has just gotten realer and realer as time goes on, to the point where it's becoming tough to ignore now, and not something that I can say, well, we'll deal with that kind of going forward. It's almost like we got to deal with that sooner than later, and start getting people over to the right side of the fence.
That makes us happy to hear. Anytime you talk about it, we think that it does a lot of good, because like you said, you do have that unique trust with your audience that non-meteorologists just cannot have. We know that you are a busy man, and that you've got to get back to those kids here in a second. I have one last question that just popped into the chat that I'll ask you here.
Okay.
So I've been wanting to ask an expert. I think I remember reading Harvey dumped 26 trillion gallons over Texas and Los Angeles. I believe Alicia was the previous record at 16 trillion. Is my memory wrong? And if true, can I point to that as a record-breaking increase of 38%, which seems a big highlight when discussing it with people, that Harvey broke that record. And even if records are broken, they're almost never broken by such a wide margin of 38%.
Yeah, to be just being completely honest with you, I don't really know. I do know that obviously the rainfall amount that Harvey dumped over Texas and Louisiana was ridiculous, and 26. I mean, you could tell me 50 trillion, and I would believe it. I honestly don't remember. I don't think now I'm not sure that Alicia was the previous record. Was the only thing I'll say. It might have been Allison. Because I don't know that Alicia was a huge rain producer, because it's a pretty quick moving storm. It was more of a wind maker than a rain maker, or at least it was known more for wind than rain. But don't quote me on that, because I'm not 100% sure. All right, Allison, I see in the chat, Allison Bevery. Allison makes a lot of sense, because Allison was big, but Allison just was dwarfed by Harvey completely. Whether or not Harvey, the record-breaking increase, it is big. It's very big for sure. Harvey was it just was a unique storm. And, I wonder what it would have been like without the impacts of climate change. Would it have been, so your max total was like 62 inches or whatever out near Beaumont? Would it have been 58 inches? Would it have been 40 inches? I don't know. Whatever it is, it's still a huge number, right? So it's tough to even fathom by that, but a record of that nature. And again, it's tough to say with certainty because of how rainfall is measured. And I just kind of want to make that clear, just from the, not to reduce the meaning of climate change on the storm, but just being completely honest, because I know that's a point that people will come at you with, like, well, rainfall, how do we measure rain? And so that becomes kind of an issue. So it's tough to say with complete certainty that we broke that previous record by that much. But I think it's pretty safe to assume that it was something like that. And it was, Harvey has got all the fingerprints of climate change on it, as posted in the chat. Estimates were that climate change added, 15 to 35% of rain to Harvey's total, which is still a big number either way, and it causes more problems. So it makes bad problems worse. And I think that's the thing that people really need to understand about climate change. It's not always going to be in your face. That it's not going to be the wildfire all the time. It's not going to be, massive flooding all the time. It's going to be this storm dumps, I don't know, 6 inches of rain instead of 4.5 inches of rain. It's going to be these little incremental changes, and that taxes infrastructure. It taxes what we've built to, and it reduces the impact of what we've built to, lowers that standard to what it is now. So I think that that's one of the key messages about climate change that people don't always understand, that it's not going to always be in your face. It's going to be this little incremental stuff that adds up over time and causes a lot of problems. And Harvey, as bad as it was, would have been bad with or without climate change. That little incremental, maybe less homes flood in the reservoirs if Harvey happens in a world with what we would call normal climate. Who knows? But it adds up over time.
Can we take a quick picture with you, and then we will let you get to your family? We thank you so much for joining us today. This has been very insightful.
Good. I'm glad, and thank you for having me again. And thanks for all the work you do to keep everything very civil. And it's so important going forward that we have to be that way. And just seeing what's happened over the last 4 to 8 years, it's going to be really disheartening sometimes. So it's heartening to see people that are embracing this approach, even in the face of consequences that we have to deal with. So
thank you. Dory, are you going to take the picture, or?
I'm going to let Joe take the picture.
All right. You're muted, Joe.
I was just going to say, Dory, can we change the gallery view, at least on my computer, so we can see everybody?
I did it on mine. So,
I got it, so I can take the picture if that works.
okay.
Let me close the chat. All right, everybody smile. Oh, where's my print screen button? Right. Okay, I got it. 1, 2. Matt, thank you so much. We'll be in touch, and go hang out with your family.
Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.